from the time that President Trump was shot, it was over an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes prior to that, when local law enforcement and Secret Service were aware in a detailed way of this threat against him. And yet, this threat was allowed to proceed to the point that he attempted to murder the President of the United States. And that brings us to the questions that we must demand answers to. I don't care if it's been 30 days and the mainstream media has no interest in asking these questions. It's a commentary on the character, not of the corporations themselves, but the individual journalists that work for everywhere from MSNBC to CNN to the Washington Post to the New York Times, that even if they disagree with the policies that President Trump stands for, that they are so entrenched in their hatred of half of the country, you and I, of conservatives, that they are not only incurious, but that they deliberately bury this story. It means they not only don't care what could have happened to President Trump had he not turned his face at the last second, but that they are willing to allow it to happen again. So here are the questions. Question number 1, what was Thomas Crooks' ideology? This is something, the reason that we're asking this question is because it's important. I refuse to allow mass shooters, whether it's school shooters, whether it's terrorists, whether it is attempted would-be assassins of the President of the United States, I refuse to allow them to be portrayed as mere crazies. And the reason that I say that is if we journey back to the Covenant school shooting, the shooting that took place at the Christian school in Nashville last year, where a trans-identifying individual committed this act of mass murder against Christians because they were Christians in the name of gender ideology, we still are not allowed to have access to the Covenant School Shooters Manifesto precisely because the left wants to hide the political ideology that motivated this shooter. The political ideology that motivated the Covenant School shooter was queer theory. Queer theory being a neo-Marxist ideology that tells LGBTQIA identifying people that they will be targeted for genocide if they do not stop, and by stop I mean kill and overthrow, Christians, white people, conservatives, government, those running our country. It is the vanguard of a revolution. That is what that ideology is. That's why that ideology is hidden from us. So it is not right to dismiss these shooters by saying they're random crazies. We don't want to give them attention because that spurs copycats. We don't want to give them the notoriety because that's what they sought. No, that is not often what they seek. Often what they seek is to live out this ideology that has been ingrained in them from the public school system to the media to from leftist politicians. From every side, these people are indoctrinated in leftism. So obviously leftists want to hide their ideology. We must demand to know what was Thomas Crooks' ideology and what was known about Thomas Crooks before the shooting. It's awfully strange to me that a young man who qualifies as being part of Gen Z has no social media footprint. This is so unrealistic, it's almost comical. Gen Z lives online. They were born, their teethers were smartphones and tablets. There is no way that there is not a digital trail of the ideology of Thomas Crooks, and yet it's being hidden from us. Why? We must find out the answer to that. Question number 2, Thomas Crooks flew a drone over the Butler County rally area some hours before Donald Trump took the stage. Not only is this unbelievable that he was able to do this, there's an additional element that is worth noting here. The U.S. Secret Service generally has counter-surveillance drones flying over an area to identify if there are drones, hostile drones that are flying over that area to help them identify threats. On this day, July 13th, 2024, the U.S. Secret Service counter drones weren't working. They failed to fly U.S. Secret Service counter drones in the way that they normally would. My question here is, why did these U.S. Secret Service counter drones not work? Who was in charge of them? Was it a mechanical issue? Was it a communication issue? And most importantly, was it unusual for the U.S. Secret Service counter surveillance drones not to be working? The answer to that question, my friends, will tell us a lot about whether this was pure government incompetence, whether this was a pure inside job, or whether this was wokeness and corruption that indirectly allowed this shooting to happen. Question number 3. At 3.5 minutes prior to the shooting, Thomas Crooks was seen on the roof. At 30 seconds prior to the shooting, Secret Service knew he was armed and lying on the roof. We established that a few minutes ago. Who then made the decision not to remove Donald Trump from stage at that point. When law enforcement was aware of an armed, credible, and accessible threat to the life of President Trump, who allowed him to stay on stage? This is a critical question. Who made the call not to tell Donald Trump before he went onto the stage so that Trump himself could decide whether he was willing to take that risk or not? All that would have needed to happen was they should have held President Trump for 5 more minutes, neutralized the threat, arrested Thomas Crooks, and then let President Trump take the stage. Why did that not occur, and who exactly was in charge of that decision? 26 minutes before the shooting, this is 18 minutes before Trump took stage, Secret Service knew that Thomas Crooks had a rangefinder. Why was he not neutralized at that point? Why was he not confronted? Why was he not arrested? Why did it take until he had fired those shots for him to be addressed? Who was in charge of that decision? And who, we know that there was one police officer that saw him several minutes before the shooting and backed down, but who was in charge those 20 minutes in the interim? Who made that decision not to confront Thomas Crooks? Question number 5 here. This is a question that Senator Mike Lee posted on X. 3 snipers were assigned to a window overlooking that infamous sloped roof that now disgraced former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle said was too dangerous for her agents to guard that roof because it was sloped. 3 snipers were assigned to a window overlooking that sloped roof, but all 3 of those snipers abandoned their post moments before the shooting. Why? Where did they go? Who gave them the direction to leave? This particular question gives me very eerie shades of the Jeffrey Epstein guards who were supposed to be looking at video monitors showing the cell door of Jeffrey Epstein every couple minutes, and yet for the entire night, that night that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, they weren't. They had abandoned their posts suspiciously in this isolated way that one night. This is very eerie shades of Jeffrey Epstein guards. 3 snipers assigned to that window abandoned their posts moments before the shooting happened. Why? Who gave them that direction? Where did they go? Who are these snipers? We must get testimony, congressional testimony, under oath from those particular snipers. And this leads me to question number 6. And I don't mean this question to sound bombastic because I don't mean it bombastically in the slightest. Are we willing to consider that the feds may have groomed Thomas Crooks into an attempted assassination of President Donald J. Trump? The reason that I'm asking this question is not because I'm suggesting that this happened. The reason that I'm asking this question is because if we look at the history of our country, we know that our government has abused citizens in the past. We know that our government has targeted politicians that the deep state dislikes in the past. We know that our government has murdered the President of the United States in the past. We know that the CIA was involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We know that the CIA has been involved in many shady murders, many grooming of violent criminals and murderers into committing those very crimes. We know in recent years that the FBI was involved in fomenting the riots outside of the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. We know that the FBI was involved in entrapping ne'er-do-wells and homeless people, drug addicts, into pretending to stage the kidnapping of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer in the name of lockdown protests so that the federal government could paint any lockdown skeptic as a violent extremist. We know our government has the capacity, the capability, and yes, the motivation to groom someone who would otherwise be willing to commit a heinous crime to actually commit that heinous crime. And again, I'm not suggesting that this happened, but if we are unwilling to even consider this possibility, if we are unwilling to even investigate whether this happened, if we come at this analysis with preconceived notions or preconceived conclusions that no, the government couldn't have been involved in any way, then we are no better than the mainstream media. We cannot fully examine what happened here if there is even one preconceived conclusion that we're bringing to the table. So if you sit there and you say, no, I'm not willing to consider that feds might have been involved in some way, then you are not actually willing to investigate what truly happened. And we owe it to our country to investigate what truly happened. Remember, the Secret Service, this is my 7th question. Why did the Secret Service lie about denying resources to the Trump campaign when the Trump campaign requested additional security? What was the justification for the denial of those requests, and who made that call? The 8th question is a question that is for the elected representatives of the United States of America. This is both Democrat and Republican. Do you care that the former president of the United States was targeted for assassination? Do you care that this could happen again? Do you care what the implications of this would have been had Donald Trump not turned his head at the last second to look at that chart that Border Patrol had prepared for him about illegal immigration in our country? Do you understand that this would have thrown our country into a civil war? Do you care? Question number 9, are there any more known threats trying to gain access to President Trump or to his family? If so, what's being done to protect them so that what happened on July 13th does not happen again? The 10th question is a practical question, but it will disgust you as much as it disgusts me to know that the investigation, the formal investigation that's being conducted into what happened on that day, is being headed by the acting director of the Secret Service, who is the former deputy director of the Secret Service. His name is Ronald Rowe. He was involved in decisions leading up to the July 13th attempted assassination of Donald Trump. The failure to protect Donald Trump is as much his responsibility as Kimberly Cheadle, and yet now he's the one supposedly conducting oversight and investigating what happened. I think not. My friends, it's been 1 month since Donald Trump was almost killed on stage at a rally because leftists have spent the last 8 years calling him Hitler and a dictator and authoritarian and telling LGBTQIA identifying people and black people and women that they are on the verge of genocide, that our democracy is under attack, and that Donald Trump is the reason why. That this hatred and fear has been fomented to the point that someone is willing to murder President Trump rather than letting an election take place and people pick our chief executive. And yet we know nothing about what happened except for a timeline that demonstrates moment after moment, second after second, failure after failure that almost led to the death of our president. We deserve better from our government if our government is truly by the people, for the people, and of the people.